Hello my friends, welcome back to another video. This is a bonus lesson which I purposely saved for the end. We're going to be looking at prompt coding, otherwise known as vibe coding, the new era of coding. The new era of coding is here. Prompt coding revolutionizes how developers create software by using structured prompts to generate complete functional code solutions. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the fundamental framework and the steps of how you would go about being a vibe coder or a prompt coder. Okay, and so the first step, similar to what we learned in our prompt engineering fundamental series, is that you want to define your objective, okay, or define your project in this case. So you say, I need to build, and then go into the specific details, a specific description of whatever you're trying to create. And the main purpose is to explain the core functionality or the goal, the objective of what you're trying to achieve here. Okay. Next, you want to identify your target audience. So who will be using this? What age? What gender, if any? Those types of things. What are their interests, etc. So that will really help to set the theme of the project. All right. And of course, just set clear goals. So establish measurable objectives for your project's success. Very similar to when you're looking to create a business or create a business plan. We're essentially doing a very similar, taking a very similar approach here. Okay, so start with a clear context and objective will help the AI to understand exactly what you're trying to build and why, resulting in more targeted and useful code generation. Moving on. Next, you want to consider your technical specifications. So specifying our technical requirements up front ensures that the generated code will be compatible with our existing systems and meet all functional needs. So it will look something like this, where we would define the platform and tech stack. So whether we want it to be, say, a web app or we want a mobile app, etc. We also want to give a list of the tech stack to the best of our ability. Okay, so for example, frameworks, libraries, tools. So do you want to use pandas? Do you want to use NumPy? Do you want to use React for building the interface? Do you want to use Gradio for the interface? What is the tech stack or the tools that we're going to be using for this project? So think about when you're going to create a cake or any type of dish, right? You have a recipe, as we spoke about in the beginning of our AI series in the prompt engineering course. We have our recipe, our goal of what food we're trying to create, and then we essentially gather all the ingredients for what is going to be in that cake or in that dish, right? So here we're doing exactly the same thing by establishing what is the tech stack that we need from the get-go. All right, and if you're not too sure, of course, part of being a prompt coder is we can ask ChatGPT or the LLM, Claude AI, whatever interface you're using, Gemini, whichever one, okay? Next, we also want to describe briefly the key features. So what features do we want our application to have? Okay, thirdly, we'll look at structure and organization. So we want detailed comments on each section. So we want to label each section saying what each major section does, how functions work, any complex logical algorithms, and integration between components. So what this step basically is aiming to achieve is that, of course, when we're getting AI to write out code for us, it may write out code in a way that is different to how we get envisioned, or use tools in a slightly different way, or create functions that we probably maybe wouldn't have implemented it in that way, or perhaps we simply just don't know. So having our code, telling our large language model, giving the instruction to label our code, in sections to tell us what each section does, is going to help us, and if we're working maybe as part of a team, to help that person to also understand exactly what's going on in each part of the code. Okay? Specific requirements. So remember, specificity is the key. So being specific about requirements helps ensure that the generated code meets all our needs without requiring extensive revision. So it could look something like this: functionality requirements. You have this specific function here, another specific function there. Okay, you want to include, well, you should want to include error handling for perhaps common scenarios, user interface or user experience requirements, any specific styling, maybe a specific color scheme that you want to use for branding, etc., etc., and any performance considerations that you may have. Next, output and format request. Okay, so specifying our preferred output format ensures that we receive code that's organized and documented in a way that's most useful for your workflow or my workflow. Okay, so you can request, for example, these deliverables: complete runnable code, each major section to be in separate code blocks. When, for example, where we use working in Google Colab, perhaps we want each code to be in its own separate cell as opposed to generated all at once. Perhaps we also want inline comments, as I've mentioned, for every single line, every single significant line. A brief explanation of how the different components work together or what particular functions do, and any setup or installation instructions that may be needed. Okay. We also have some advanced prompt strategies, being specific about behavior. So instead of saying make it user friendly, we could say include hover effects on buttons, loading states for API calls, and clear error message that tell users exactly what went wrong. Okay, and also define the success criteria. So remember, using the analogy of a business startup, we want to be very clear on what our objectives are so that we can know when we succeeded or when to perhaps run a second, third, fourth, fifth iteration. Okay, so an example could say something like the solution should load in under 2 seconds, work on mobile and desktop, handle up to X amount of concurrent users, and gracefully fail when X scenario occurs. And as I've just mentioned in the previous slide, requesting iterations. So requesting iterations allows us to see different versions of the solution from simple to more complex and help us to understand the code better and choose the right approach for our needs. Okay, so it's essentially like having prototypes or beta testing, of our code. Alright, so we have a simplified version for beginners, then we might move up to a more enhanced version with specific advanced features, modifications, common modifications that users might want to make. Okay. Next, we can ask for explanations. So requesting explanations, as I've mentioned, alongside code helps us to understand not just what the code does, but why it's designed in that way, making it easier to maintain and modify in the future. Okay, so we could say we can ask for a justification as well in the comment. So this is just getting more in depth with our comments as to what we want each comment to essentially say. So we can have a justification approach as to why you've chosen this approach over alternatives. Perhaps you could do that in the second or third or fourth iteration after we are more familiar with the code base. Dependency explanation, what each major dependency does. Extension guidelines, how to extend or modify the functionality, and common pitfalls to avoid. Maybe we want in our comments to mention about common pitfalls of what could potentially go wrong or what to look out for when using such an implementation. Okay. Then, of course, we would expect to have a testing and validation stage. So requesting testing and validation guidance ensures that our code is robust and helps us to identify and fix issues before they affect the users. Okay, so just think of the AI as essentially a coding expert or a coding partner helping you along in this coding journey. All right, so we want it to follow all the steps that a regular professional coder would follow. Okay, but we are essentially, as the CEO, we're in the driver's seat, right? So we need to tell the AI exactly what we expect and how we want it to work. Okay, so we could say including your request example usage scenarios and some test cases for main functionality, how to debug common issues, and validation for user inputs. Okay, and some more pro tips for prompt coding. Progressive disclosure. So start with a basic version, then ask for enhancements. First show me a simple version, then enhance it with XYZ features. Alternative approaches. So show me 2 different ways to implement this with pros and cons of each approach. Modular design. Make each component independent so I can easily modify or replace parts later. Edge cases. Handle scenarios like empty data. Network failures, invalid inputs, and extreme values. Documentation, include a README file explaining how to set up, run, and modify the code. And again, coding style. Use modern JavaScript features, for example, or use Python, for example, or use XYZ toolkit. Alright? Descriptive variable names and consistent formatting. Yep. So after the working version, suggest performance improvements and some best practices. Some more enhanced tips and some power tips. So starting with the enhanced tips. So list all tools and frameworks. Also specify versions when relevant and explain why each is needed. Add comments to each line or section. Request both inline comments and block comments explaining the bigger picture. Add each new section in separate code blocks. Ask for a file structure diagram showing how pieces fit together. Okay. Additional power tips. So request example data. Include realistic sample data to demonstrate functionality, for example. Secondly, ask for troubleshooting guide. Include common issues and how to fix them. Thirdly, specify browser compatibility. Ensure it works with Chrome or Firefox or Safari, for example. Request mobile first design. Design first for mobile, then enhance for desktop. Fifth, include accessibility. Add proper ARIA labels and keyboard navigation. So things like accessibility and thinking about disabled users. Alright. Ask for performance metrics. Includes ways to measure and improve performance. And lastly, request deployment guidance. Explain how to host and deploy such an application. Alright. So that pretty much concludes it for this bonus lesson. But before we're done, we're going to go ahead in the next lesson and look at a practical example of prompt coding.